Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he hammered the metal plate into shape. The asteroid mining station was always hot, always loud, and always dangerous. The air recyclers worked poorly, making every breath taste like metal and oil. Around him, dozens of other humans worked in the dim red light, their faces covered in dust and exhaustion. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the work area. Jake looked up to see Commander Thessul approaching, his tall alien frame casting long shadows. The Kethver commander had 4 arms and skin like dark leather. His yellow eyes glowed in the low light as he surveyed the human workers like a farmer checking his livestock. "Work faster," Thessul growled in his broken English. "The Empire needs more metal. You humans are slow today." Jake kept his head down and continued working. He had learned long ago not to look the aliens in the eye. It only brought trouble. Behind him, he heard Lisa Rodriguez curse under her breath as she struggled with a broken welding torch. She was one of the best mechanics on the station, but the tools they gave humans were always old and breaking down. "Hey Lisa," Jake whispered when the commander moved away. "How's that project coming along?" Lisa glanced around to make sure no guards were watching. "Almost done. Ben finished the modifications yesterday. We just need to test it without them knowing." Ben Carter was hunched over a control panel nearby, pretending to check the mining equipment. He was thin and quiet, but Jake knew he was the smartest person on the station. Before the aliens came, Ben had been an engineer on Earth. Now he fixed mining machines and dreamed of freedom. The work shift lasted 14 hours. When the buzzer finally sounded, the humans trudged back to their living quarters. The hallways were narrow and poorly lit. The walls were made of cheap metal that showed rust stains and scratches. This had been Jake's home for 8 years now. Ever since the Kethver had moved him from the farming colony where he grew up, Jake's room was barely big enough for a bed and a small table. He shared it with 2 other men, but they were working different shifts. He sat on his bed and pulled out a small piece of metal he had been hiding in his boot. It looked like scrap, but Jake knew better. It was part of a communication device that Ben had been building piece by piece over the past 2 years. A soft knock on the door made Jake quickly hide the metal. "Come in," he said. Lisa entered, followed by a young man with sandy hair and nervous eyes. Jake recognized him as Danny Rodriguez, Lisa's younger brother. Danny was only 19 and had been on the station for less than a year. "We need to talk," Lisa said quietly. She looked tired and worried. Jake nodded and checked the hallway before closing the door. "What happened?" "Danny saw something today," Lisa said. "Tell him, Danny." The young man fidgeted with his hands. "I was working in the deep mines, Section 7. I heard voices, so I went to look. There were 3 Kethver guards talking about something called the Final Harvest." Jake felt his blood turn cold. "What exactly did they say?" One of them said, "The Empire was almost done with this asteroid belt. They're going to move all the humans to new mining sites in 6 months. But the other guard laughed and said most of us wouldn't make the trip." Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. "They're planning to kill us, aren't they? Once they've stripped this place clean, we're no longer useful." Jake had suspected this for a long time. The Kethver Empire saw humans as tools, nothing more. When a tool broke or became useless, you threw it away. He had seen it happen on other stations. Humans would disappear overnight, and new ones would arrive to replace them. "How many people know about this?" Jake asked. "Just us," Danny said. "I came straight to Lisa." Jake walked to his small table and moved it aside. Underneath was a loose floor panel. He pried it up and pulled out a small bag containing electronic parts and handwritten notes. "Then it's time," he said. Lisa stared at the hidden items. "Time? For what?" "Ben's been working on more than just communication devices," Jake explained. "We've been planning for this day, the day we fight back." He spread the papers on his bed. They were covered with drawings of the station's layout, guard schedules, and weapon locations. There were also lists of names humans at other mining stations who were part of their secret network. "You've been planning a rebellion?" Danny whispered, his eyes wide. "For 3 years," Jake said. "We have people on 17 different stations. Engineers, mechanics, pilots, even some who work in the alien command centers. The Kethver think we're too stupid and broken to organize, but they're wrong." Lisa picked up one of the drawings. It showed the station's power core and the locations of all the alien weapons. "How did you get all this information?" "Humans clean their ships, repair their equipment, and serve their food," Jake said. "They see us every day, but they don't really see us. We're invisible to them. That's been our advantage." Danny looked scared but determined. "What do we do?" Jake rolled up the papers. "Tomorrow is the shift change. Half the guards will be sleeping, and the other half will be tired. Ben has modified some of the mining charges to work as weapons. Lisa, you know where they keep the small transport ships. You want to take over the station?" Lisa asked. "Not just the station," Jake said. "All 17 at the same time. If we hit them together, they won't be able to send help to each other." He looked at both of them seriously. "But I need you to understand something. Once we do this, there's no going back. The Kethver will try to kill every human they can find. This isn't just about escaping. This is about war." Lisa was quiet for a long moment, then she nodded. "My parents died when the aliens first came. My grandparents died in the labor camps. I've been waiting my whole life for this chance." Danny was still nervous, but he straightened his shoulders. "If Lisa's in, I'm in." Jake felt a mix of pride and fear. These people trusted him to lead them into battle against an enemy with better weapons, better ships, and centuries of military experience. But Jake knew something the aliens didn't. Humans had something that no other species in the galaxy possessed. When they were pushed too far, when everything was taken from them, humans became dangerous in ways that couldn't be calculated or predicted. "Get some rest," Jake said. "Tomorrow we tell Ben and the others. In 2 days we begin." After Lisa and Danny left, Jake lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, he could hear the sounds of the station. The hum of machinery, the distant voices of guards, the occasional clang of metal on metal. For 8 years, these sounds had been the soundtrack of his slavery. Soon, he thought, they would be the sounds of war. Jake closed his eyes and remembered Earth. He remembered blue skies and green grass. He remembered the smell of rain and the feeling of wind that wasn't recycled through machines. The Kethver had taken all of that away. They had taken his freedom, his family, and his world, but they had made one mistake. They had left him alive. They had left all the humans alive, thinking they were broken and defeated. Tomorrow, Jake would show them how wrong they were. The revolution would begin with mining charges and stolen ships. It would begin with humans, who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The aliens called them slaves, but Jake knew better. They were humans who remembered what freedom felt like. And that made them the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. The explosion echoed through mining station Omega-7 at exactly 0300 hours. Jake Morrison pressed himself against the metal wall as debris rained down from the ceiling. The lights flickered and went out, leaving only the red emergency glow to guide them through the darkness. "Ben, did it work?" Jake shouted over the noise of alarms and screaming aliens. Ben Carter's voice crackled through the small radio device. "Power grid is down. Their communication arrays fried. We have maybe 10 minutes before they get backup systems online." Jake grabbed his makeshift weapon, a mining tool that Ben had modified to fire explosive charges. Around him, dozens of other humans emerged from hiding spots throughout the station. They moved quickly through the corridors, following the plan they had rehearsed in secret for months. Lisa Rodriguez led a group toward the transport bay. Her face was covered in soot, but her eyes burned with determination. "Remember, we need those ships intact," she called to her team. "No explosives near the fuel tanks." The first HFY guard they encountered was stumbling through the dark, trying to reach his weapon. He never made it. 3 humans tackled him at once, and the alien's superior strength meant nothing when he couldn't see his attackers coming. "Jake!" Danny Rodriguez's voice was high with panic. "There's a whole squad of them heading for the main armory." Jake turned to see 6 HFY soldiers running down the corridor, their weapons already drawn. These weren't the lazy guards who usually watched the humans. These were real soldiers, and they moved with deadly purpose. "Everyone down!" Jake yelled. The humans dropped to the floor as energy bolts flew over their heads. The alien weapons lit up the darkness with bright flashes of blue light. Jake rolled behind a support beam and fired his mining tool. The explosive charge hit the lead HFY in the chest, sending him flying backward into his companions. "Now!" Lisa shouted at the humans rushed the confused aliens. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fair. The HFY were stronger and better armed. But they had spent years thinking of humans as weak and cowardly. They weren't prepared for desperate people who fought like cornered animals. Jake reached the transport bay just as Lisa's team finished overpowering the last guard. 3 small HFY ships sat in the docking area, their engines still warm from recent use. "Can you fly these things?" Jake asked Amy Johnson, a woman who had once been a cargo pilot before the aliens captured her. Amy was already climbing into the nearest ship. "The controls are different, but Ben gave me the basics. I think I can figure it out." Ben Carter arrived with his arms full of modified equipment. "I've got the communication jammers ready. Once we get these installed, the other stations won't be able to call for help." Jake looked around at his people. They were dirty, tired, and scared, but they were also free for the first time in years. "How many casualties?" 3 wounded, none dead, Lisa reported, but the aliens lost 12. Jake nodded grimly. They had been lucky so far, but this was just the beginning. "Ben, get those jammers online." "Amy, I need you to contact the other stations. It's time to light them all up." The next hour was chaos. Jake listened to reports coming in from the other mining stations as their own rebellions began. Some were going well. Station Omega-3 had been taken completely, with only minor injuries to the human workers. Station Omega-12 had captured their entire guard force alive, but others were struggling. Station Omega-9 had been discovered before they could start their attack. The humans there were fighting for their lives against a full security team. Station Omega-15 had managed to destroy their power grid, but couldn't reach the transport bay. "Jake," Amy called from the pilot's seat. "I'm getting a signal from something big, really big." Jake hurried to the communication console. "What kind of signal?" "Military frequency." HFY Empire codes. Amy's face was pale. "I think they're calling in the fleet." Jake felt his stomach drop. They had known this would happen eventually, but he had hoped for more time. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 6 hours before the first ships arrive. Maybe less." Jake looked around the transport bay at his small group of rebels. They had captured 1 mining station and a few small ships. Now they were about to face the full might of the HFY military. "Listen up, everyone," Jake called out. "The aliens are sending warships. We need to move fast." Lisa looked up from the equipment she was organizing. "Move where? We can't outrun a military fleet in these little ships." "We're not running," Jake said. "We're going to that moon." He pointed at the large view screen showing the local star system. "Kepler 442c. It's got an atmosphere and some old mining tunnels. We can set up a base there." Then shook his head. "That's crazy. We'll be trapped." "We're already trapped," Jake replied. "At least there we can prepare for them. Maybe even the odds a little." Amy was working frantically at the ship's controls. I've got contact with 8 other stations. 5 are ready to evacuate. 3 are still fighting. Tell the ones who are ready to meet us at the moon, Jake ordered. The others ... He paused, thinking about the humans who were still trapped and fighting. Tell them we're not leaving them behind. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. What do you mean? I mean we're going to hit the HFY ships that are heading for the other stations. We're going to give our people a chance to escape. With what? Ben demanded. We've got 3 small transport ships and some mining equipment. Jake smiled grimly. We've got something better. We've got surprise, and we've got nothing left to lose. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The humans loaded everything useful into the captured ships. Food, water, medical supplies, and all of Ben's modified equipment. They also took every weapon they could find, including the aliens' own energy rifles. Amy had figured out how to fly the HFY ships, and she was teaching others. The key is to think like them, she explained. Everything is about efficiency and control. But these ships have more power than they usually use. What do you mean? Jake asked. I mean we can overload the engines. Make them go faster than they're supposed to. It'll probably burn them out, but we'll get one good run out of them. Ben was working on something in the corner of the bay. I've been thinking about those HFY weapons, he said. They're energy-based, right? But what if we could turn that energy back on them? He held up a device that looked like a mirror, attached to a mining tool. I think I can make their own shots bounce back at them. It won't work forever, but it might give us an edge. Jake felt a spark of hope. His people were adapting, learning, fighting back in ways the aliens would never expect. How many of those can you make? Give me 2 hours, and I can make a dozen. You've got 1 hour, Jake said. Amy, I need those ships ready to fly. Lisa, gather everyone who can fight. We're going to war. As the humans prepared for battle, Jake stood at the viewscreen watching the stars. Somewhere out there, HFY warships were heading toward the remaining mining stations. The aliens thought they were coming to crush a simple rebellion. They were wrong. They were coming to face humans who had decided that death was better than slavery. And Jake was going to teach them that when humans had nothing left to lose, they became something the galaxy had never seen before. They became free. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his massive warship, watching the human moon grow larger on the main screen. The rebel base was nothing more than a small settlement built into old mining tunnels. His fleet of 30 ships could destroy it in minutes. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we are receiving a transmission from the humans. Vextar laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. They want to surrender already? Put it through. Jake Morrison's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired and dirty, but his eyes were steady. Admiral Vextar, I presume. I'm Jake Morrison, leader of the human resistance. You are slaves who have forgotten their place, Vextar replied coldly. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick, Jake smiled. I have a better idea. Why don't you come down here and make us surrender? The transmission ended. Vextar stared at the blank screen in disbelief. No slave had ever spoken to him like that. No conquered species had ever shown such disrespect. Admiral, his tactical officer said, their defensive positions are minimal. A few weapon platforms and some small ships. This will be easy. Vextar nodded. Begin the attack. Show them what happens when they defy the Empire. Down on the moon's surface, Jake watched the alien fleet approaching through his binoculars. The ships were beautiful and terrifying, sleek metal forms that moved through space like hunting animals. Ben, are your modifications ready? Jake asked into his radio. Ben Carter's voice crackled back from the underground command center. Ready as they'll ever be. But Jake, I still think this is insane. Probably, Jake agreed. Amy, are you in position? Amy Johnson was floating in space between the moon and the approaching fleet, hidden inside an asteroid that Ben's team had hollowed out. "I'm here. This is the craziest thing I've ever done, and I once flew a burning ship through a meteor shower. Lisa, how are our surprises?" Lisa Rodriguez was in the deepest tunnel with Danny and a dozen other humans. They were surrounded by equipment that hummed and sparked with dangerous energy. "Everything's connected. When you give the word, we'll light up this whole moon like a star." The first HFY ships opened fire. Energy beams lanced down from space, striking the weapon platforms on the moon's surface. The platforms exploded in brilliant flashes of light and metal. "Now they think they're winning," Jake muttered. He pressed the transmit button. "Amy, you're up." Amy Johnson had been a cargo pilot, not a fighter. But 3 years of slavery had taught her to hate in ways she never knew possible. She fired the engines of her hidden ship and burst out of the asteroid, heading straight for the alien fleet. The HFY were completely surprised. Their sensors showed empty space one moment and a human ship charging at them the next. Amy's ship was small and fast, and she had loaded it with every explosive Ben could spare, for Earth. Amy screamed into her radio as she aimed her ship at the alien flagship. Admiral Vextar watched in horror as the human ship slammed into his vessel's side. The explosion tore a massive hole in the hull, and atmosphere rushed out into space. Emergency alarms filled the bridge. "Damage report," Vextar shouted. "Hull breach on decks 7 through 12. We've lost main power to the weapons array." But that was just the beginning. More human ships appeared from hiding spots throughout the asteroid field. They had been waiting, concealed and silent, for this moment. The humans didn't fight like any enemy Vextar had ever faced. They didn't try to outmaneuver his ships or engage in proper battle formations. Instead, they flew straight at his fleet, ramming into alien vessels with suicidal determination. "They're all doing suicide runs," his tactical officer reported in disbelief. "Every single ship." Ben Carter had taught the human pilots a terrible lesson. The HFY ships were designed to fight enemies who wanted to survive. Their shields and weapons were meant to stop attacking ships, not ships that were trying to explode. Jake watched from the moon as ship after ship of his people destroyed themselves to damage the alien fleet. Each explosion hurt his heart, but each explosion also proved something important. Humans could win if they were willing to pay the price. "Jake," Lisa's voice came through the radio, "the aliens are landing troops on the surface. A lot of them." Jake could see the dropships descending toward the moon. Hundreds of HFY soldiers were coming to finish the job their fleet had started. "Are the tunnels ready?" Jake asked. "Ready," Lisa confirmed. "Danny says to tell you this is for our parents." Jake closed his eyes for a moment. Danny Rodriguez was 19 years old. He should have been in college or starting a career, not preparing to die in a tunnel on an alien moon. "Do it," Jake said quietly. The explosion started deep underground and worked its way up. Ben had connected every piece of alien technology they had captured, every weapon, every power cell, every engine core. When Lisa activated the chain reaction, it turned the entire moon into a weapon. The HFY soldiers on the surface had just enough time to realize what was happening before the ground beneath them erupted. Tunnels that had been carved for mining became channels for destruction. The explosion traveled through the rock like lightning, emerging from hundreds of openings across the moon's surface. Admiral Vextar watched from his damaged ship as the moon lit up, like a second sun. The humans had turned their own base into a bomb, killing themselves to destroy his ground forces. "How many soldiers did we lose?" he asked quietly. "All of them, sir. Every soldier we sent to the surface is dead." Vextar stared at the glowing moon. In 30 years of military service, he had never seen anything like this. The humans were fighting a war he didn't understand, using tactics that made no sense. "Admiral," His communications officer said, "We're receiving another transmission. From the humans." "That's impossible. Their base was destroyed." "It's coming from one of the asteroids, sir." Jake Morrison's face appeared on the screen again. He was inside a small ship, floating in space near the burning moon. His face was streaked with tears, but his voice was steady. "Admiral, I want you to take a message back to your empire. Tell them what you saw here today. Tell them that humans remember what you took from us. Tell them that every time you try to hurt us, we'll hurt you back 10 times worse." Vextar found his voice. "You destroyed your own people. You're all insane." "No." Jake replied, "We're free. And we're going to stay free, no matter what it costs." The transmission ended. Vextar looked around his damaged bridge at his surviving officers. Half his fleet was destroyed or crippled. All his ground forces were dead. And the humans had accomplished this with a handful of small ships and mining equipment. "Sir," his navigation officer said quietly, "what are your orders?" Vextar was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Retreat, we're going home." "Sir." "I said retreat," Vextar shouted. "These humans are not what we thought they were. The Empire needs to know what we're really fighting." As the Kethver fleet limped away from the destroyed moon, Jake Morrison floated alone in his small ship. Around him, the debris of the battle drifted through space. Ships, weapons, and the bodies of both humans and aliens. He had won this battle, but the cost had been terrible. Amy Johnson was dead. Danny Rodriguez was dead. Lisa was dead. Dozens of other humans had sacrificed their lives to prove a point. But the point had been made. The Kethver Empire now knew that humans were not broken slaves. They were something far more dangerous. They were people who would rather die than kneel. Supreme Commander Zal Thek stood before the Great Council of the Kethver Empire, his forearms clasped behind his back. The council chamber was vast and dark, filled with the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Today they were all staring at him with expressions of disbelief and anger. "Explain to us again how Admiral Vextar lost half his fleet to a handful of slaves," Council Leader Mordix demanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. Zalthek had been a soldier for 40 years. He had conquered 12 worlds and crushed dozens of rebellions. But he had never seen a report like the one from the human moon battle. "The humans are not fighting like any enemy we have faced before," Zalthek said carefully. "They use tactics that our military doctrine cannot counter. They sacrifice their own lives to achieve victory. They are primitive creatures with stolen technology," another council member said dismissively. "Send more ships. Crush them with overwhelming force." Zalthek nodded slowly. "I have prepared 3 full war fleets. 1,500 ships, including the planet-killer Worldbreaker. The humans will not survive this time." But privately, Zalthek felt uneasy. He had studied the battle reports carefully. The humans had turned mining equipment into weapons, used their own base as a bomb, and sacrificed hundreds of lives to destroy a superior enemy. This was not the behavior of a normal species. Meanwhile, in the asteroid belt where the first battle had taken place, Jake Morrison was learning the same lesson from the other side. He floated in a makeshift space station built from the wreckage of both human and alien ships. Around him, the survivors of the rebellion worked frantically to prepare for the next attack. "How many people do we have left?" Jake asked Ben Carter, who had somehow survived the moon explosion by being in a shielded command bunker. Ben looked up from the alien technology he was studying. 237 humans across 12 hidden bases. "We also have 43 captured Kethver ships, but most of them are damaged." Jake nodded grimly. They had started with thousands of people across 17 mining stations. Now, they were down to a few hundred survivors scattered across the asteroid belt. "What about weapons?" Jake asked. "That's the interesting part," Ben said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. I've been reverse engineering their technology. Jake. These aliens have been using the same weapons for centuries. They never innovate because they never need to. Every enemy they face uses similar tactics. Ben led Jake to a workbench covered with alien equipment. But humans are different. We adapt. We improvise. I figured out how to overload their fusion reactors and turn their own ships into bombs. I've also found a way to accelerate asteroids to near light speed using their own engines. Jake stared at the equipment. You're talking about turning rocks into planet killers. Exactly. The Kefir have better technology, but they think inside the box. We don't have a box anymore. Over the next few weeks, Jake's people worked like demons possessed. They had learned the Kefir were sending 3 massive fleets to destroy them. The odds were impossible, but Jake had stopped caring about odds. He visited each of the hidden bases, talking to the survivors. These were people who had lost everything. Their families were dead, their homes destroyed, their entire lives stolen by alien conquerors. But instead of despair, Jake saw something else in their eyes. He saw rage. Pure, burning hatred that had been building for 3 generations. At Hidden Base 7, he found a group of former engineers led by a woman named Ruth Collins. They were working on something they called the Scorched Galaxy Protocol. We're not trying to win a war, Ruth explained as she showed Jake their plans. We're trying to make war so terrible that the aliens will never want to fight humans again. The plans were horrifying. They involved turning entire asteroid fields into weapons, creating cascading explosions that could destroy solar systems, and targeting not just military ships but every piece of Kefir infrastructure they could reach. This will kill billions of aliens, Jake said quietly. Ruth's expression was cold as winter. Good, they killed billions of us. At Hidden Base 12, Jake met with the pilots who would fly the suicide missions. They had painted messages on their ships, for Earth. Remember the colonies. Death to slavers. The youngest pilot was a Sophan girl named Kelly Price who couldn't have been more than 16. My parents died in the labor camps, she told Jake. My little brother died of sickness because they wouldn't give him medicine. I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid of living in a galaxy where aliens think they can do whatever they want to humans. Jake tried to talk her out of it, but Kelly just smiled sadly. You started something, Jake. You showed us that we don't have to kneel. Now we're going to finish it. The Kefir fleets arrived exactly when their intelligence had predicted. Supreme Commander Zolthek led the armada personally, confident that sheer numbers would overwhelm the human rebels. The first thing that went wrong was the asteroids. Ben Carter had spent weeks selecting the right rocks and positioning them throughout the system. When the alien fleets entered the asteroid belt, they found themselves surrounded by what looked like ordinary space debris. Then the asteroids began to move. Jake had learned from the first battle that the Kefir expected conventional tactics. So he gave them something completely unconventional. Instead of ships attacking ships, he sent rocks flying at nearly the speed of light. The first asteroid struck the alien flagship before anyone even realized what was happening. The impact was like a nuclear explosion, tearing the massive ship apart in seconds. More asteroids followed, guided by modified alien technology that the Kefir couldn't detect or stop. What is happening? Zolthek demanded as his fleet was torn apart by flying rocks. The humans have turned the entire asteroid belt into a weapon, his tactical officer reported in amazement. They're using our own propulsion technology to accelerate the asteroids. But the asteroids were just the beginning. As the alien fleets tried to regroup, human ships emerged from hiding. But these weren't the small transport vessels from the first battle. These were Kefir warships that had been captured and modified. The humans had filled the ships with explosives and set them on collision courses with the largest alien vessels. Each ship was piloted by a volunteer who had nothing left to lose. And everything to avenge. Kelly Price was flying one of those ships. As she aimed her vessel at a HFY destroyer, she spoke into her radio one last time. This is for every human child who died in your camps. This is for every parent who never saw their kids again. This is for 3 generations of slavery. Her ship struck the destroyer's engine core, and the explosion lit up the entire system. Supreme Commander Zalthek watched his fleets being destroyed by an enemy that fought like nothing he had ever seen. The humans weren't trying to defeat his ships in battle. They were trying to erase his fleets from existence. "Sir," his communications officer said, "we're losing ships faster than we can count them. The humans are targeting our supply vessels, our command ships, everything." Zalthek realized with growing horror that the humans had turned warfare into something personal. They weren't fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for revenge. "Order all ships to retreat." Commanded. "Sir," I said, "retreat. These humans are not trying to win a war. They're trying to burn down the galaxy. And they're succeeding." As the surviving HFY ships fled the system, Jake Morrison stood in the command center of his makeshift station. Around him, the survivors celebrated their impossible victory. But Jake felt no joy. He had won by becoming something terrible. He had turned his people into weapons of destruction. And he knew that this was only the beginning. The HFY Empire would never stop hunting them now. But Jake also knew something else. Humans had proven that they could not be enslaved again. They had become too dangerous to conquer. They had become fire itself. The Worldbreaker hung in space above Earth like a dark moon, its massive hull blocking out the sun. Supreme Commander Zalthek stood on the command bridge of the enormous weapon station, staring down at the blue and green planet below. The humans' birth world looked peaceful from this distance, but Zalthek knew better now. He knew what kind of monsters came from that beautiful world. "All systems are charged and ready," his weapons officer reported. "The planet killer cannon can fire at your command." Zalthek nodded slowly. The Worldbreaker was the HFY Empire's ultimate weapon, capable of cracking planets in half. It had taken them 6 months to bring it to Earth, and it represented their final solution to the human problem. "Open a channel to the human fleet," Zalthek ordered. Jake Morrison's face appeared on the main screen. He looked older than when Zalthek had first seen him, with new scars and gray in his hair. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship was crowded with humans working frantically at alien control panels. "Commander Morrison," Zalthek said formally, "you see my weapon. You know what it can do. Surrender now, and your species will be allowed to live as slaves. Continue this rebellion, and I will destroy your homeworld." Jake stared back at him with eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. "You want Earth? Come and take it." The transmission ended. Zalthek turned to his weapons officer. "Begin charging the primary cannon. In 1 hour, the human homeworld dies." But Jake Morrison had spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment. The human fleet that surrounded Earth was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wasn't made up of purpose-built warships. It was a collection of captured alien vessels, modified human transports, and weapons that should never have existed. Ben Carter had spent months working on humanity's final surprise. Deep in the asteroid belt, he had built something he called the Phoenix Protocol. It was insane, dangerous, and probably impossible. But then again, so was everything else humans had done. "Jake," Ben's voice crackled over the radio from his hidden workshop, "the Phoenix Protocol is ready." "But you know what this means." Jake did know. The Phoenix Protocol would work, but it would cost them everything. Every human ship, every human life in the fleet, all sacrificed for one chance to destroy the Worldbreaker. "All ships," Jake announced over the fleet communication system. "This is Jake Morrison. Today we end this war. Today we show the galaxy that humans bow to no one." Throughout the fleet, thousands of humans prepared for battle. These were the survivors of 3 generations of slavery, the children and grandchildren of people who had never known freedom. They had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Amy, Johnson's younger brother Carl, sat in the cockpit of his modified fighter, checking his instruments one last time. Amy had died in the first battle, sacrificing herself to save others. Now Carl was about to follow her path. "For Amy," he whispered, and pushed his engine to full power. The battle began when the human fleet suddenly scattered in all directions. The Kethver expected them to attack the Worldbreaker directly, but instead they flew toward every other alien ship in the system. "They're targeting our escort fleet," Zolfek's tactical officer reported in confusion. "They're ignoring the Worldbreaker." Completely. But Jake knew something the aliens didn't. He had learned that Kethver fusion reactors could be overloaded in a specific way. Ben had discovered that if you crashed into them at exactly the right angle, with exactly the right modifications, the explosion would be massive enough to create a chain reaction. One by one, human ships rammed into alien vessels. Each collision created a fusion explosion that spread to nearby ships. The escort fleet began to burn as ship after ship detonated in brilliant flashes of light. "Sir," the tactical officer said, his voice rising in panic, "the explosions are getting bigger. Each one is feeding into the next." Zolfek watched in horror as his entire escort fleet was consumed by cascading explosions. The humans had turned their own deaths into a weapon that grew stronger with each sacrifice. "They're creating a fusion storm," his science officer reported. "If this continues, the reaction will be large enough to damage even the Worldbreaker." "Impossible," Zolfek said. "Our station is shielded against any conventional weapon." "This isn't conventional, sir. They're using our own technology against us in ways we never imagined." The fusion storm continued to grow, fed by the sacrifice of hundreds of human pilots. Jake watched from his command ship as his people died to create something beautiful and terrible. Each explosion was a human life, a person with dreams and fears and hopes for the future. "Jake," Carl Johnson's voice came over the radio, "I'm making my run now. Tell everyone we did good." Carl's fighter was loaded with every explosive Ben could spare. His target was the Worldbreaker's main reactor, buried deep inside the massive station. It should have been impossible to reach, but the fusion storm had damaged the station's outer defenses. Carl flew through explosions and energy beams, his small ship dancing between debris and enemy fire. He thought about his sister Amy, who had started this war with her courage. He thought about his parents who had died in Kethver labor camps. He thought about all the humans who would never see freedom if he failed. "This is for everyone we lost," Carl said, and aimed his ship at the reactor core. The explosion when Carl's ship hit the Worldbreaker's reactor was beyond anything Zolfek had ever seen. The fusion storm that the humans had created suddenly had a new source of energy, one that dwarfed everything that had come before. "All hands, abandon station." Zolfek screamed as the Worldbreaker began to tear itself apart from the inside. But it was too late. The chain reaction had grown too large to contain. The Worldbreaker, the ultimate weapon of the Kethver Empire, was being destroyed by humans who turned their own deaths into weapons. Jake Morrison watched from his command ship as the massive station exploded like a second sun. The shockwave washed over his fleet, destroying most of the remaining human ships. But it also destroyed every Kethver vessel in the system. When the light faded, Jake found himself alone in a small escape pod, floating among the debris of the greatest battle the galaxy had ever seen. Earth hung below him, blue and beautiful. And his radio crackled with a transmission from the planet's surface. Jake, are you there? This is Commander Sarah Williams of the Earth Defense Force. We're reading your signal." Jake had never heard of Sarah Williams, but her voice sounded strong and confident. "I'm here," he said weakly. "Is the planet?" "Secure. More than secure," Sarah replied. Jake, you need to know something. What you did here, what all of you did, it's inspired every enslaved species in the galaxy. There are rebellions starting on 100 worlds. The Kethver Empire is collapsing. Jake closed his eyes and felt tears running down his face. What about the cost? All those people who died, they died free, Sarah said gently. And they died making sure that no one will ever be enslaved again. As Jake's pod was guided down to Earth's surface, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. It had started with mining tools and stolen ships. It had ended with the destruction of the galaxy's greatest weapon and the fall of an empire that had seemed unstoppable. The humans had been called slaves. They had been treated like animals, worked to death in alien mines, and forgotten by a galaxy that saw them as worthless. But they had remembered something that their captors had forgotten. They had remembered that some things were worth dying for. They had remembered that freedom was not given, it was taken, and they had taught the galaxy a lesson that would never be forgotten. When the powerful prey on the weak, they should remember that the weak might not stay weak forever. And when they become strong, they might not be forgiving. The humans had been slaves. Now they were free. And the galaxy would never be the same.